John, the 13th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
When Judas had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
The syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer said once that the real upside to being a cynic is that one is rarely, if ever, disappointed. This can also be said by anybody who takes the faith seriously. The longer one is a Christian, the harder it is to become disappointed in listening to what comes out of the mouths of other Christians. Like the man who left our church because he didn't like the idea of renting our facilities to one of the churches that rent from us because he couldn't forgive them for what happened during the Korean War. When I heard this, the only thing I could think of was that the Korean War ended before I was born. And that was a very long time ago. And my second thought was that while the man might have had a great memory, he had a poor grasp of history. Because anybody who managed to leave Korea was from the South, and they were on our side. And if they did happen to live in the North and escape to America, they should be congratulated and welcomed for both their tenacity and their bravery. If one is not a cynic, one could become disappointed at the church's long history of dividing one group from another. Blacks from whites, males from females, Catholics from non-Catholics, gays from straight, even ethnicity from ethnicity. Whenever I see this, I always wonder, what were these people listening to all these years? It certainly couldn't have been the gospel of Jesus Christ, who had this weird tendency of welcoming everybody. At one time or another in his ministry, Jesus sat at table with everyone, from sinners to tax collectors, to Gentiles, to Samaritans, to scribes and Pharisees. Jesus welcomed them all, but it did not take his followers long to forget that. The biggest struggle in the early church was whether the gospel was just for the Jews, but also for the Gentiles. Read everyone else. Watching this battle rage in the book of Acts could disappoint all but the most hard-hearted of cynics. But again, as always, we have to understand history. Few boundaries were more rigid and honored than the boundary between Jew and Gentile. Through centuries of persecution, diaspora, and difficulty, Israel had remained faithfully Israel by carefully distinguishing between those who were part of the covenant and those who were not. The survival of a scattered, besieged minority was accomplished only through the honoring of the boundaries between Jews and Gentiles. The problem was, and this was a lovely one to have if only the apostles had seen it as so, once they started telling the story of Jesus, all kinds of people began to become interested and, wouldn't you know it, wanted to become followers of Jesus too. Gentiles wanted to become followers. This should have been seen as a good thing. But from the very beginning, the church was the church. And so there was a struggle. Should we let them in or not? Do they have to become Jews first before they become followers of Jesus? This, for the male Gentiles, would mean circumcision. And I'm sure that that cut back on the number of converts drastically. You go ahead, honey, the husband might say. Become a Christian if you want, but me and the boys, we're just going to learn what we can about Jesus from a safe distance. To confront the problem, the church did what churches have done ever since. Somewhere around 50 AD, less than 2 decades after Jesus' ministry had concluded, the church, apparently forgetting everything that Jesus had taught about love and openness, has a council meeting in Jerusalem to call Peter on the carpet for telling the story of Jesus to Gentiles. The accusation to Peter sounds strangely familiar to the words that the religious leaders used in complaining against Jesus. Why were you eating, fellowshipping with outsiders? Peter's testimony to the council is only that of a vision that would have puzzled Carl Jung. It's a dream about a large sheep being lowered from heaven, full of animals that were commonly eaten by Gentiles, but were not acceptable by righteous Jews. Then a voice says to Peter, "Get up, kill, eat." Peter's first response is to say, "No way." And 3 times during the long night of tossing and turning, Peter refuses the offer. Pouring his morning coffee, he is no doubt puzzled about what that dream meant. Then he tells his prosecutors, his fellow Christians in Jerusalem, what happened.